no food for Christmas dinner, the widow's neighbor brought an Apache woman and her child. Clara Duval sat in the warmth of her small cabin, the flames of the fire crackling softly in the hearth. Outside, a heavy snowstorm covered the land, the snow falling thick and fast. Her hands were busy stitching a small patch on her dress, but her mind wandered. Christmas was only a few days away, but she could already feel the loneliness of the season creeping in. Her husband, James, had died in a mining accident 3 years ago. Since then, it had been just Clara and the land. The once thriving farm now struggled in the harsh winter cold. The fields were barren, the livestock few. There would be no Christmas feast this year, no warm meal shared with family or friends. Only the empty quiet of a cold winter evening. Clara glanced around her small home, her eyes resting on the simple wooden table in the center of the room. It was bare. There were no decorations, no feast, not even a small treat to make the day feel special. She sighed deeply, feeling the weight of the years without James. But just as she thought the evening would end like every other night, quiet and lonely, she heard the sound of hooves approaching. Her heart skipped a beat, and she stood up quickly, looking out the small window. Through the snow, she saw a figure riding towards her cabin. Clara's breath caught in her throat. It was Ezra McCoy, her neighbor. Ezra was a rough, hard-working rancher, known for his strong will and weathered face. His ranch was on the other side of the valley, and it wasn't often that he came by. Clara had known him for years, but they weren't close. He was a man of few words, always focused on his work. Still, his presence on such a cold evening was unexpected. Ezra pulled his horse to a stop outside Clara's door and dismounted. His face was red from the wind, but there was a strange look in his eyes, as if something weighed on his mind. He knocked on the door, and Clara opened it, surprised by the unexpected visit. "Evening, Clara," Ezra said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "I know it's late, but I've brought someone with me." Clara raised an eyebrow, unsure of what to expect. Ezra had always been a private man. He never had visitors, and she certainly didn't expect anyone to be with him now. "Someone's with you?" Clara asked, stepping aside to let him in. Ezra nodded and stepped into the warmth of the cabin, brushing the snow off his coat. Behind him, Clara could see the figure of a woman and a small child standing just outside the door. The woman's face was hidden by a dark shawl, but Clara could see the outline of her features and the small child she held in her arms. "This here is Ayanna," Ezra said, motioning to the woman, "and this is her son, Ishani. They've had a rough time, and I figured you could help them out for a night. They've nowhere else to go." Clara hesitated for a moment, her eyes scanning the woman and child. The woman's skin was darker than hers, and she wore clothes that looked foreign to Clara, rough-hewn and simple. The child, no more than 5 years old, clung to his mother's side, peeking out at Clara with large, curious eyes. Ayanna didn't speak at first. She simply nodded her head, acknowledging Clara's presence. Her eyes, dark and tired, told a story of hardship that Clara could only imagine. But, despite the silence, there was a quiet strength in the woman's posture, as though she had lived through things no one should have to endure. She wasn't used to strangers, especially not ones who seemed so far removed from the life she knew. The sight of Ayanna and her child stirred a feeling of sympathy in Clara, but it was also a feeling of uncertainty. The land she lived on was harsh and unforgiving, and her resources were already stretched thin. But Ezra was looking at her with pleading eyes, his usual tough demeanor softened by concern. "They've been through a lot," he said. "Her village was destroyed. The winter's been hard on them, and they don't have much." She could see the desperation in Ezra's eyes, something more than just a neighborly request. He was asking her for help, and there was no one else to turn to. Her cabin was small, and her food supplies were low, but she couldn't turn them away, not on Christmas Eve. "Come in, then," Clara said softly, stepping aside to let Ayanna and Ishani into the cabin. "I don't have much, but you're welcome to stay for the night." "Thank you, Clara. I knew you'd understand." Ayanna, still silent, moved past Clara, her eyes never fully meeting hers. She set Ishani down by the fire, and the child immediately seemed at ease, watching the flames with wide, innocent eyes. Ayanna sat beside him, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders, her face still shadowed by the dim light. Clara didn't know what to say. The silence between them felt heavy. She busied herself with making the small fire brighter, trying to shake off the unease she felt. She wasn't sure how to help, but she would try. As the evening wore on, Clara offered what little food she had, a small bowl of soup she had been saving for herself, and a few pieces of stale bread. It wasn't much, but it was all she could offer. Ayana accepted the food quietly, and Ishani ate with the enthusiasm of a child who hadn't had a good meal in days. Ezra sat across from Clara, his expression somber. "Thank you again," Ezra said after a long silence. "I didn't know where else to go. They've lost everything." Clara nodded, her heart softening. She had lost much, too. Her husband, the life they had built. But in some way, they were all survivors. She understood the weight of that more than anyone. As the night drew on, Clara and Ezra talked briefly, but most of the conversation was held in silence. The fire flickered, casting long shadows on the walls, as Clara began to realize that this Christmas Eve would be like no other. She didn't have the feast or the gifts she had once hoped for, but she had company, and sometimes that was enough. The morning after the unexpected arrival of Ayana and her son Ishani was cold, with the wind howling outside and the ground covered in a thick blanket of snow. Clara woke early, the first light of dawn creeping in through the small window. The fire had burned low in the hearth, and the cabin was chilly, but the presence of her guests made the space feel warmer than it had in a long time. She rose from her bed and quietly moved to the kitchen. Her mind was still heavy with the events of the night before. Ayana and Ishani had been quiet guests. The woman, though soft-spoken, held a presence that was undeniable. Ishani, the young boy, had seemed shy at first, but had warmed to Clara as soon as he noticed the small fire she had built. He was a curious child, asking questions about the cabin, the food, and the land, his innocence shining through in the midst of the hardship that had brought them here. Clara began to prepare a small breakfast of cornmeal porridge, just enough for the three of them. The food was simple, but it was all she had left in the pantry. She had never expected to feed more than just herself on Christmas morning. The thought of not having enough to give to Ayana and Ishani made her stomach twist with unease. As she set the bowls on the table, she heard movement behind her. Ayana had risen early as well, and was sitting by the fire, her dark eyes studying the flames. Clara glanced over at her, unsure of how to break the silence. "Good morning," Clara said softly, her voice hesitant. She wasn't used to speaking to strangers, let alone ones who had seen so much pain. Ayana turned to her, offering a small, quiet smile. "Good morning," she replied, her voice soft but steady. "Thank you for everything." Clara nodded, still unsure of what to say. She motioned to the table. "I don't have much, but I've made breakfast. Please sit." Ayana stood and walked to the table, her movements graceful and deliberate. She sat down across from Clara, her son Ishani joining her. The boy smiled at Clara, though there was a trace of sadness in his eyes. It seemed that, even at his young age, he knew the weight of their journey. The three of them ate in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Clara could hear the soft sound of the wind outside, but inside it was peaceful. Ayana and Ishani didn't speak much, but there was a quiet bond between them. Clara couldn't help but wonder about the woman's story. What had happened to her village? How had they ended up here, in the middle of the harsh frontier, with nothing but the clothes on their backs? Finally, Clara could no longer keep her curiosity at bay. She set her spoon down and looked directly at Ayana. "I know it's not my place to ask, but how did you come to be here? What happened to your people?" Ayana paused, her gaze turning inward, as if the question stirred painful memories. Ishani looked up at his mother, his small hand resting on hers. After a long moment, Ayana spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "We lived in a village near the mountains," she began. "We were a small group, just my family and a few others. We had a life, a home. But then, there was a strange light in the sky one night. At first we thought it was just a star or something from the heavens, but then it came closer and we realized it wasn't like anything we had ever seen." Clara leaned forward, her interest piqued. Ayana's words had a weight to them, a feeling that this story was more than just the tragedy of a lost village. "It wasn't just a light," Ayana continued, her voice trembling slightly. "It was an energy of pulse. It hit our village, tearing through the land and everything in its path. The trees were burned, the earth cracked open, and our homes, they were destroyed. People were injured, and some of them didn't make it." Clara's heart sank. She had heard rumors of strange happenings in the frontier, but this was unlike anything she had imagined. Ayana's words painted a picture of devastation, of something unnatural that had torn apart the world she once knew. "We tried to leave," Ayana continued, "but the land was no longer the same. It was poisoned by the pulse, the air thick with strange energy. We couldn't stay. That's when Ezra found us." Clara nodded slowly, the weight of Ayana's story sinking in. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, unsure of what else to say. I had no idea. Ayana's eyes softened, and she gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head. It's not your fault. There's nothing anyone could have done. It wasn't a natural thing. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. The pulse that Ayana spoke of sounded like something from another world, something beyond the reach of anything she had ever encountered. Do you think it will happen again? Clara asked cautiously. Ayana looked out the window, her gaze distant. I don't know. But I fear that whatever caused it is still out there. I think it wants more. Clara's mind raced. What could have caused such a thing? Was it a natural disaster or something more sinister? She didn't have the answers, but one thing was clear. Ayana and Ishani were no longer just strangers passing through. They were part of something much larger, something that had yet to reveal its full scope. Ezra, who had been silent for most of the conversation, finally spoke up. I reckon we ought to head to the hills soon. There's a spot up there where the pulse hit hardest. Maybe we can figure out where it came from. Clara looked at him, surprised by the sudden proposal. You think there's something we can do? Ezra nodded, his face grim. Maybe not much, but if we can find the source, we might be able to stop it from happening again. Ayana stood, and Ishani followed her. I'm ready, Ayana said, her voice steady. If there's a chance to stop this, we have to try. Clara felt a sense of determination rise within her, despite the uncertainty. She hadn't asked for this, but now that she was involved, she couldn't turn back. The quiet life she had known seemed to be slipping away, replaced by something far larger than herself. The three of them finished their meal in silence, each of them preparing for the journey ahead. The wind howled outside, but Clara could feel a new resolve growing inside her. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about finding answers, and, perhaps, a new purpose. The next morning, Clara, Ezra, Ayana, and Ishani set out toward the hills. The wind howled through the barren landscape, whipping the snow into a frenzy. The air was cold, biting at their skin, but there was no turning back now. They had decided to head toward the source of the mysterious pulse Ayana had spoken of, hoping to find answers. Clara had never ventured this far from her cabin before. The hills in the distance had always seemed like a part of the world she didn't need to understand. The frontier was already a harsh enough place. But now, with Ayana's story fresh in her mind and Ezra's quiet determination urging her forward, Clara couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something important awaited them. Ayana and Ishani walked ahead, their footprints barely visible in the snow. Clara noticed how the young boy seemed to move with purpose, his small feet quick and sure. It was as if he knew the land better than anyone else, and Clara couldn't help but feel a small sense of admiration for him. Ishani had already proven to be a helpful child, always quick to pick up on things the adults missed. Clara found herself wondering if the boy's deep connection to the land was more than just instinct. Ezra walked beside Clara, his tall frame cutting through the wind as if he were used to the cold. He had spoken little since the decision was made to journey toward the hills, but his presence was comforting. Clara had always known him as a man of action, not words, and now, with the situation growing more serious by the hour, it was clear that this was a man who could be counted on. As they trudged along, Clara felt the weight of the silence settle over them. The land around them seemed untouched, as though the pulse that had destroyed Ayana's village had not reached here. But Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, waiting just beyond their sight. The path grew steeper as they climbed, the snow thick underfoot. Clara's legs ached, and her breath came in shallow gasps. She had grown accustomed to working hard on the land, but this was different. This was a journey into the unknown, and every step felt like a risk. Still, she pushed on, determined to reach the source of the strange energy that had haunted Ayana's people. Ayana, though quieter than Ezra, seemed to know exactly where she was going. Her eyes were fixed on the horizon, her pace steady. Ishani walked just behind her, occasionally looking back at Clara and Ezra as if making sure they were following. Clara could sense a deep connection between mother and son, a bond that went beyond the simple act of survival. There was something spiritual in the way they moved through the world, something Clara hadn't understood until now. As they climbed higher, the wind began to pick up. It howled through the hills, a constant angry force that made it hard to hear anything over the noise. The sky grew darker, and the air seemed to carry a strange weight, as if the land itself were holding its breath. They reached the top of the hill by midday. The view was breathtaking, but Clara didn't have time to appreciate it. Ayana stopped abruptly, her eyes scanning the land before her. The others gathered around her, unsure of what had caused her to pause. "What is it?" Ezra asked, his voice quiet but tense. Ayana pointed ahead toward a large rock formation. The stone towers loomed above them, sharp and jagged, their edges softened only by the snow that clung to their surfaces. Clara could see nothing unusual at first, but as her eyes followed Ayana's gaze, she began to sense the change in the air. There was something off about this place, something unnatural. "This is where the pulse hit," Ayana said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can feel it. The land is still scarred from what happened here." Clara's heart raced. She had heard of places like this, places where strange things happened, where the land itself seemed to change, as if touched by something beyond understanding. But this was real. This was happening right before her eyes. Clara shivered, feeling the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. Ezra took a deep breath, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the area. "We'll need to be careful. If the pulse came from here, then we may be walking right into danger." Ayana nodded, but there was a determination in her eyes. "I'm not afraid."
"We need to understand what happened."
"We can't let this happen to anyone else." Clara hesitated, but then stepped forward, following Ayana and Ezra as they approached the rock formation. The snow crunched under their feet, and the wind howled around them, but the closer they got to the rocks, the more Clara felt something stir in the air. It was like the land was alive, watching them, waiting for them to uncover its secrets. When they reached the base of the rock formation, Ayana knelt down, brushing the snow away from a patch of ground. There, hidden beneath the snow, was something that made Clara's breath catch in her throat. It was a symbol, an ancient mark carved into the stone. The lines were deep, but time had worn them down, making them harder to see. Still, it was unmistakable. The symbol was like nothing Clara had ever seen before, but there was something familiar about it, as if it were from a world long forgotten. Ayana traced her fingers over the symbol, her face reflecting a mix of recognition and unease. "This is it," she said. "This is the mark of the ones who destroyed my village." She had no idea what Ayana meant, but it was clear that this was no ordinary place. Whatever had happened here was connected to something far larger than any of them. "What do we do now?" Clara asked, her voice trembling slightly. Ezra stepped forward, his eyes scanning the area. "We need to find the source of the energy. This mark, it's a warning. It's not just a symbol. It's a map." Ayana nodded, and Ishani, who had been quiet for most of the journey, stepped forward, pointing to another part of the rocks. "Over there," he said, his voice soft but sure. "There's something there." Clara looked in the direction Ishani had pointed, but all she could see was more rocks and snow. Yet there was something about the way the child spoke that made her believe him. "We'll go check it out," Ezra said, his tone resolute. "Stay close." The group moved cautiously toward the spot Ishani had pointed out. As they approached, Clara's sense of unease grew. The air felt thick, as if something were shifting, something just out of reach. She didn't know what they would find, but she knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning. The wind howled through the rocky hills, carrying with it a sense of unease that weighed on Clara's chest. She had followed Ezra, Ayana, and Ishani deeper into the heart of the rock formation, her every step feeling heavier than the last. The air had grown thick with an almost unnatural stillness, and Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something ancient was waiting for them. They had reached the spot Ishani had pointed out, a place where the rocks seemed to form an unnatural shape. It wasn't just a random pile of stone, there was a clear structure hidden beneath the snow. It was as if the earth itself had been moved to conceal something important. Clara's heart raced as she took in the sight before her. The rocks had been carved into strange patterns, symbols similar to the one they had uncovered earlier. But these were different, more intricate, more complex. As Clara stepped closer, she felt a sudden pulse, a strange vibration in the ground beneath her feet. It was as though the rocks were alive, humming with a power that Clara couldn't comprehend. Ezra knelt down beside the stone formation, his hand brushing the snow aside. "This isn't just some natural formation," he muttered, his voice low. "Someone built this. And it wasn't built for any good purpose." Ayana stood a few steps away, her face grim. She had not spoken much since they had arrived at the rocks, but Clara could see the tension in her body. The woman's eyes were fixed on the stone, her gaze focused and intense. She knew something that Clara couldn't yet understand. "I know this place," Ayana said quietly, almost to herself. "I've seen it in the stories of my people. Long ago, our ancestors spoke of a time when the land would be controlled by forces that did not belong here. They said the earth would tremble and the sky would burn." Clara looked at Ayana, her confusion deepening. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ayana turned to face Clara, her dark eyes filled with a mix of sadness and resolve. I don't know all of the stories, but I know this. Whatever happened to my village, it wasn't just an accident. It was caused by something beyond this world. And I think it's here. The things Ayana was saying made no sense to her, but there was a weight in her words that told Clara that the woman wasn't speaking lightly. The destruction of Ayana's village wasn't just a natural disaster. It had been caused by something that had come from the very earth itself. Ezra stood up, dusting his hands off.
We need to keep moving. This isn't the only spot.
There are more of these formations. We can't waste time. Clara nodded, her thoughts racing. She had never imagined that a simple Christmas Eve would lead her here, to this strange place, with these strange people. But now, she couldn't turn back. She had to see this through. For Ayana, for Ishani, and for herself. They continued their journey deeper into the formation, their footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. The rocks towered above them, casting long shadows on the snow-covered ground. The further they went, the more Clara felt the pulse in the earth, the more she felt that something was watching them, waiting for them to uncover its secrets. After what felt like hours of walking, they reached another clearing. This one was different. The rocks here formed a circle, and in the center there was a large stone slab, smooth and cold. Clara could feel the heat radiating from the stone, despite the chill of the air around them. "This is it," Ezra said, his voice low and tense. "This is the source." Clara looked at the stone, her heart racing. She could feel the energy coming from it, a force so strong that it made her feel as though she might fall to her knees. The ground beneath her feet seemed to tremble with each passing second. Ayana stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the stone. "It's here," she whispered. "This is what destroyed my people." "What is it? What does it do?" She stepped closer to the stone, her hand outstretched. "It's not just a rock," she said, her voice shaking. "It's a device, a weapon, and it's been buried here for centuries." "A weapon?" Ayana nodded. "Yes. The energy that destroyed my village, it came from this. But it's not just a weapon. It's something much older. Something that belongs to a people who were here long before any of us. And they left it behind." Ezra crouched down beside the stone, his hands hovering just above it. "If this is the source, then we need to destroy it. We can't let it fall into the wrong hands." What were they about to do? Could they destroy something so ancient, something so powerful? But she knew that there was no other choice. If they didn't, whatever had destroyed Ayana's village might destroy more. There was no way to know what kind of power this stone held. Ayana turned to Clara, her expression unreadable. "We need to use the symbols, the ones we found earlier. They'll help us unlock the stone." Clara nodded, her mind racing as she tried to piece together everything Ayana had said. The symbols, the strange energy, the weapon. She felt as though she were standing on the edge of a cliff looking down into an abyss. She didn't understand it all, but she knew one thing. If they didn't act now, it would be too late. Ezra moved toward the stone, his hands tracing the patterns in the rock. The air around them seemed to thicken, and Clara felt the temperature drop even further. She shivered but didn't move. She couldn't. As Ezra worked, the stone began to hum, the vibrations growing stronger with each passing second. Clara could feel it in her chest now, a deep, resonant thrum that seemed to reverberate through her bones. She stepped back, instinctively reaching for Ayana's hand. Ayana squeezed her hand tightly. "It's working." Just a little longer. Suddenly the stone cracked, a jagged line running across its surface. Clara gasped, stepping back even further. Ezra, however, stood firm, his eyes locked on the stone. With one final push, the stone shattered, a burst of energy erupting from its core. Clara covered her eyes as the light grew blinding, but when she opened them again, the stone was gone. The energy had dissipated, leaving behind only silence. The air felt lighter, the vibrations in the ground fading away. They had done it. The weapon was destroyed, but as Clara looked around at the others, she knew that this was only the beginning. The land had been changed, and the forces that had once controlled it were not gone. The future was still uncertain, and there were more battles to be fought. For now, though, they had won. And for the first time in a long while, Clara felt a glimmer of hope.